What really happened behind the scenes of one of TV's most iconic shows? For decades, Audrey Meadows stayed silent about her time beside the explosive Jackie Gleason. But at 73, she finally revealed the emotional toll hidden beneath the laughs and applause. This is the untold story of the honeymooners and the woman who carried the weight of comedy's darkest truth. Stay with us to uncover it all. I am a woman. I forgot that you're a woman. You're always yapping. You say I don't treat you like a woman? I let you sew. I let you cook. I let you clean the windows. What more do you want? Lines like these made millions laugh. But behind the laughter, something much heavier was happening. Something Audrey Meadows carried in silence for decades. And when she finally spoke out at the age of 73, it wasn't with bitterness, but with a quiet, sobering truth that forever changed how fans remember Jackie Gleason. To the public, Audrey Meadows was the smart, grounded, patient wife who anchored Ralph Cramden's volcanic personality. On The Honeymooners, she was Alice, the voice of reason, the subtle comedic genius who could match Gleason line for line. To many, it seemed like they had a rare, magnetic chemistry that could only come from deep respect and camaraderie. But the reality behind that black and white image was far more complicated and far less affectionate. For years, Audrey never spoke of what really happened behind the scenes. In an industry that often demanded silence from its women, she played the game perfectly. She smiled. She stood in the background, and she never shattered the illusion. But illusions don't last forever. In her later years, Audrey quietly began revealing the truth, not in explosive memoirs or televised interviews, but in handwritten letters, subtle confessions, and a few rare sit-downs. And what she said didn't destroy Jackie's legacy, but it reshaped it. She described working with a man whose genius was undeniable, but so was his need for control. Jackie Gleason wasn't just the star of The Honeymooners, he was its heartbeat, its brain, and its fist. He decided what the tone would be. He decided which scenes stayed, who got lines, and how every beat played out. And that kind of power made the set feel more like a tightrope than a workplace. When Audrey first auditioned for the role of Alice, Jackie rejected her immediately. She looked too elegant, he said, too polished to be believable as a blue-collar housewife. Undeterred, Audrey posed for a photographer in a house dress with no makeup and messy hair. She mailed the photo directly to Jackie. Only then did he agree to give her a chance. That first impression set the tone. If Audrey wanted to be part of the show, she'd have to play by his rules. And play by them she did. Brilliantly. But it came at a cost. She was never allowed to alter a line without his approval. Writers, directors, and even studio heads knew. When Jackie was on set, everyone else fell in line. For Audrey, it meant constantly calculating how much she could push back. Could she sharpen a punchline without bruising his ego? Could she suggest a new rhythm to a scene without offending his control? She became an expert at walking that razor's edge. Her calm, measured energy became the perfect counterbalance to Jackie's bombastic style. But it wasn't because they had real chemistry, it was because they didn't. People think we got along because we had chemistry, she once told a friend, but it worked because we didn't. It was an illusion. And Audrey, ever the professional, never broke character. When cameras rolled, their energy crackled. Audiences laughed, critics applauded. But as soon as the scene ended, the warmth evaporated. Jackie rarely spoke to Audrey off camera. There were no post-show parties, no shared laughs, no moments of mutual affection. It was all business. And as time wore on, the cost of that disconnect began to accumulate. Jackie's infamous temper made the set a place of tension. He didn't believe in rehearsing, which meant performances were often done in a single take. One flubbed line or missed cue could trigger a tirade. Crew members described the mood as electrified whenever he walked in. Everyone on edge, waiting to see what version of Jackie they'd get that day. For Audrey, this meant constantly performing under emotional duress. She had to be flawless, not just in her lines, but in her demeanor. Any misstep could set him off. And even when she did everything right, there were days when Jackie would ignore her, or worse, humiliate her in front of others. And yet she stayed, not because she enjoyed the environment, but because she believed in the art. Audrey saw The Honeymooners as something bigger than both of them. It made people laugh. It gave working-class families a mirror. and she wasn't about to walk away just because the price was high. But that price, oh, it added up. Behind her composed public image was a woman constantly managing the emotional weight of someone else's volatility. The exhaustion was real, and though she kept her smile for the cameras, she confided in close friends that the experience was deeply draining. But quitting meant giving up everything she had worked for, and staying meant enduring even more. Audrey chose to stay, but eventually staying silent wasn't enough. And as she aged, her resolve to protect the myth began to fade. To the outside world, Audrey Meadows appeared serene, composed, and unshakable. But in private, she was unraveling piece by piece under the weight of a performance that never truly ended. Working with Jackie Gleason meant being on constant emotional alert. His moods dictated the air on set. If he arrived upbeat, the crew relaxed. If he arrived brooding, everyone froze. Audrey wasn't just acting, she was surviving. Every moment on the honeymooners set was laced with unpredictability. Gleason refused rehearsals, demanded respect, and operated with a hair-trigger temper. And as the show gained momentum, so did his outbursts. Directors became cautious, writers walked on eggshells, and Audrey, who played the wife, became the daily emotional buffer. She couldn't complain. She couldn't cry. She just delivered the lines. Jackie Gleason's energy could be electric, but it was also domineering. Sometimes he'd shout across the stage without warning. Sometimes he'd ignore Audrey entirely for days. Other times he'd publicly mock her delivery, only to praise her hours later like nothing had happened. This emotional whiplash became a routine Audrey endured in silence. There was no safe space to process it, no HR department, no social media outcry. If Audrey had spoken up in the 1950s, she would have been labeled difficult, a death sentence for women in entertainment. Instead, she smiled. She thanked Jackie in interviews. She played the loyal co-star, and she never hinted at the strain she was under. To fans, the show was joyful. Behind the curtain, it was anything but. But those closest to her knew. In quiet conversations, she confessed her growing unease. She talked about the loneliness, the unpredictability, and the daily tension that came with being Gleason's scene partner. Some days she went home in tears. Other days, she simply shut down. But still, she never said a word publicly. She believed protecting the illusion mattered, that the fans needed the myth more than she needed vindication. It wasn't just self-sacrifice, it was survival. CBS executives pressured her to stay. They reminded her the chemistry between Ralph and Alice couldn't be replicated. They promised more opportunities, more money, and they quietly discouraged any mention of conflict behind the scenes. Audrey agreed, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to calculate what speaking out would cost. In those years, silence was the only form of control she had, but that silence chipped away at her. As the years passed, Audrey pivoted to other roles. She took on parts that gave her more autonomy, more respect. But even then, the memories of the honeymooners lingered. Whenever Jackie's name came up, her demeanor would subtly shift. Her eyes would narrow slightly, her smile would tighten, and those close to her knew there were stories she still hadn't told. That changed in her 70s. No longer under the industry's microscope, Audrey finally allowed herself to speak. Not with anger, not with tabloid sensationalism, but with quiet, measured honesty. In a few select interviews, in letters passed between friends, and in the subtext of her memoir, Audrey began to write a different story. She acknowledged Jackie's genius, his timing, his charisma, his rare ability to dominate a stage with a single look. But she also acknowledged the pain he left in his wake. She described how his volatility turned every day on set into an emotional gamble, how his silence could be just as punishing as his outbursts, how she felt more like a prop than a partner. And yet, she never tried to destroy him. That was never her intention. Audrey was too graceful for that. Instead, she simply told the truth. She said it plainly without malice. Jackie Gleason was brilliant and brutal. Working with him was a privilege and a punishment. He built something iconic, but he didn't do it alone. And the cost of his greatness was often paid by those around him. She didn't want revenge. She wanted understanding. In her memoir, she wrote, "We made history, but it came at a price." For her, that price was emotional fatigue, years of self-censorship, and the ache of knowing that her own story had gone untold for too long. But by finally revealing her experience, Audrey gave voice not just to herself, but to countless others who had endured similar silence in the name of art. Her confession didn't erase the magic of the honeymooners. It added to it. It made it human. The show wasn't great because the stars loved each other. It was great because it was real. And reality, as Audrey finally made clear, is rarely as clean as a punchline. The Honeymooners wasn't just a television show. It was a cultural cornerstone. It resonated across generations, quoted endlessly, cherished in reruns, and etched into the hearts of viewers. But what audiences never saw was how fragile that brilliance really was. The secret wasn't the writing. It wasn't even the performances. It was the delicate daily balancing act Audrey Meadows performed, off camera. While Jackie Gleason was unpredictable and larger than life, Audrey had to be the ballast. She steadied the show. She absorbed his rants, his silent spells, his moods that could shift on a dime, and she did it all while keeping her performance razor sharp. Comedy is timing, but for Audrey it was also tension management. That's what made her revelations so profound. She never trashed Jackie. Instead, she revealed how tightly she had to control herself just to match him. In one late interview, Audrey described Jackie as a hurricane you couldn't prepare for. Some days he was warm, charming, even delightful. On others, he could humiliate you without blinking. The atmosphere on set wasn't joyful. It was electric with anxiety. And that current ran strongest between Alice and Ralph. What audiences saw as chemistry was often real-life conflict, filtered through comedy. Audrey said, "We were never close enough to get comfortable." That line alone changes everything. It reframes the series, not as the product of love and respect, but as the result of two professionals walking a tightrope, pretending to be a couple while barely speaking behind the scenes. But in that contradiction, warmth on screen, ice off, it became something more than fiction. It became reality with all its complications. Audrey never claimed to be perfect. She had her regrets. She sometimes wondered if she should have walked away sooner or spoken out earlier. But she also knew that the time wasn't right back then. In the 1950s, silence was expected. Women who challenged powerful men rarely got second chances. She wasn't willing to risk everything she'd built, so she played the part. She played it better than anyone. And when Jackie passed away in 1987, Audrey didn't celebrate or mourn publicly. She showed up, quietly, respectfully. No interviews, no drama. Just a quiet goodbye to the man who had defined and in many ways shaped the hardest years of her career. To a friend, she later said, "I forgave him, but I never forgot." Those words, simple, understated, said more than 1,000 tabloid stories ever could. She was not seeking pity. She was seeking peace. In her final years, she reflected on that era often. She didn't dismiss Jackie's brilliance. She called it rare. But she also said it came with collateral damage. That for every joke that made America laugh, someone was biting their tongue off stage. She didn't need to destroy the myth. She only wanted to make room for her part of it. Her story resonated because it didn't try to rewrite history. It clarified it. It reminded us that performance often comes with pain, and that legacy should be shared, not hoarded. Audrey Meadows' voice, steady and wise in her 70s, became the voice of every woman who kept her head down for the sake of harmony. She showed us that silence isn't always strength, and that speaking up, even late, is still brave. When she finally shared her truth, she didn't take the stage as Alice. She didn't play the foil or the wife or the patient smile. She stood there as Audrey, a woman who endured, who outlasted, and who finally spoke. And that, in the end, may be her most powerful role of all.